Hello, what's up guys? I'm coming to you 34 weeks pregnant. We are almost at the finish line with baby number 2. He's also a boy, so Lucas is gonna have a baby brother. We've been trying to prepare him for this. Been reading him books, been talking to the baby. You know, sometimes he gives the belly a kiss, sometimes he gives it a smack. So we'll see how it goes. I'm anticipating a little bit of sibling rivalry because of course, you know, he's been in the center of our world for the last 2 years and he won't be anymore. So it is quite a reality check for sibling to transition to now being 2 siblings. In this video, I'm gonna do a pregnancy and motherhood Q&A. I'm gonna try and answer all these questions for you. I'll put some timestamps. How is your second pregnancy different from your first? How do you prepare for motherhood as a first-time mom? Pregnancy supplements, labor choices, how to juggle entrepreneurship and motherhood, how do you teach your son and what does he know, and do you use screen time? So these are all questions that you guys asked me through Instagram. I'm gonna do my best to answer all of them today, and again, there will be timestamps. So first and foremost, how is your second pregnancy different from your first? It definitely is different, and I feel like probably most moms can relate to this. The first pregnancy was so relaxed, and your life is just different when you're not a mom. You know, it's a huge transition. When you're not a mom, you have your, you know, your work that you go to and then your personal affairs, but otherwise life is rather relaxing. You do what you want to do when you want to do it. You can go to that, you know, prenatal class whenever you want to do it. You can do the Pilates class whenever you want to do it. And that's how it was for me. I did meditation retreats. I read a lot of books. I just had a much more relaxing pregnancy. I did more during my pregnancy to prepare for birth. This second time around, I almost feel guilty for this baby because I feel like he's gotten gypped off compared to the first. Like, across the board, I just have not been putting as much attention on myself during this pregnancy as I did with my first, because now I have a little child that needs my constant attention. So I've definitely not put in as much effort into all the pregnancy prep, into taking care of myself. And, you know, whether or not that really, at the end of the day, makes a big difference in my labor and delivery, in how my baby turns out, probably not much. You know, it's pretty amazing how these babies are able to grow healthy without much of our conscious involvement. But nonetheless, like, you know, I've been trying to be healthy. My first pregnancy, I was healthier. I'm definitely having more cravings this pregnancy. But, you know, it's just different, you know. I have almost 2-year-olds that I'm constantly picking up because he still needs mama, he's still so young. That creates a lot of back pain for me because obviously when you have a huge belly like this, to be carrying you know, a 30-pound baby is not ideal. But otherwise, and then I'm just more tired because, you know, chasing him around all day is not always easy, and playing with him all day is not always easy. So yeah, it's different. It's not as idealistic as the first pregnancy. There's a lot of things that I just said whatever about, and I think that's what happens when you become a mom and you have multiple children. The first, you kind of like treat it as this precious egg, and you have all these ideals and these standards and these ideas of how you want to be a mom. And then as time goes on and you have more children, you kind of drop those standards maybe a little bit because reality sets in and you realize that you can't do everything. So for me, Lucas has still been my priority, and I've been taking really good care of him and a little bit less care of myself. But I'm okay with that. You know, I feel good overall. Overall, it's been a healthy pregnancy and I'm very grateful for that. And I'm just praying for a really easy and smooth labor and delivery. So we'll get to the labor question after. Okay, how do you prepare for motherhood? So the best thing that you can do for your unborn child is to work on yourself, is to dedicate time to your personal development. I really want to emphasize that because we all have shadows, we all have conscious and unconscious beliefs, we have things from our past that affect how we show up today, how we behave, how we react. And the best thing you can do is to become conscious of these things and to work on yourself so that you can be the best version of who you truly are, which is to truly be who you were created to be, unhindered by those past experiences. And that allows you to show up and be a present mother. It allows you to be a mother that is not parenting through the way she was parented, in the past. You're not transferring the way you were parented onto your children. You have a kind of a clean slate to do things consciously and to be a conscious parent and to really decide on how it is that you want to raise your children. So I really think that the start of that is to reflect on yourself personally, take personal responsibility, see where do I struggle most, what triggers me? How can I become conscious of things that I've been otherwise unconscious of? And see how you can let go of those things and work on yourself. And that will inevitably help you to be a great mother for your child. And that is the best gift you can give them, because every parent is always going to be doing their best. And that's why we cannot pass judgment on anyone. I really have zero judgment for any parent, because I really just have so much empathy for, especially moms. After becoming a mom, I just have so much more empathy for moms. But, when I look at the way I was parented, and I think I had, my mom did the best that she could, and she's wonderful, and I love her to death. And she did a great job. But I also just look at, my mom and dad, and I see, the way that they did things and the things that they were unconscious of. My awareness of how I was parented is really helpful in how I'm parenting my son, because I'm aware of what I do want to take from that experience and what I don't want to take from that experience. But most of the time we're so unconscious of ourselves that we don't even realize what we're pulling from our past experiences, what we're pulling from how we were raised as children, and transferring that to our kids. And so, for me, the greatest gift you can give to anyone who's close to you, your child, your life partner, your close family, your very close friends, is to just become a more conscious person. Because then, you're gonna radiate more energy, you're gonna be able to be there for people authentically, and you're just gonna be a gift in the world. So that's number one, and that's not any small feat. So that's something that takes probably months, who knows? It depends, each person is different, right? But the more you can prepare yourself to be emotionally, spiritually in a good place, the easier it will be for you to transition into motherhood. Okay, the second thing is books. Yes, books are extremely helpful, and I love books because the opportunity they present is that you have an author who's basically spent their life's work studying something, learning something, discovering something, and sharing with you their findings through a book that you can consume in a very short period of time. So you can acquire an insane amount of knowledge that you otherwise wouldn't have access to. You wouldn't meet this person in person, and so you have them as a resource at your fingertips in the form of a book. So it's a privilege to read a book. Now, I'm not talking about parenting books on how to be a mom, because that is going to come naturally to you. Don't worry about that. It's instinctual, created by design, just the same way that you can get pregnant by design, the same way these instincts kick in as a mother, and you will learn and you will know what to do when your child needs your support. But books on more niche topics can be very helpful. Now, I think one of the most important topics that any parent can invest their time into learning prior to having children, and even if you have children already and you don't understand this topic, this is worth your time. It's on attachment. And I've made a whole separate video about this, so I will link it for you guys because I do hope you watch it. It is one of the most important and yet neglected things about parenting. There's over 40 years of research on attachment theory, and there's just a lot of evidence and a lot of studies on how the attachment of a child to their primary caregiver, which in most cases is the mother, how that affects them, not only throughout childhood, for the rest of their lives. And it's just common sense. I mean, you don't have to think too deeply about it. Just think about, like, how are you affected by your parents? You know, who you today as a fully grown adult who has, you know, you're emotionally intelligent, your brain is fully developed, and yet you're still affected by how you were raised by your parents. And you are most affected in the first 3 years of life. And that is when attachment is formed. It's actually a survival mechanism that the brain has developed, because infants are extremely vulnerable, especially human infants. Most other animals, they come out of the womb and they have much more abilities than human babies. A lot of them can already walk and fend for themselves. Humans are extremely vulnerable. And that's why they actually call it the fourth trimester. So after the third trimester, you give birth, and then the next 3 months they call it the fourth trimester. It's because some people believe that the babies would have just been too big to birth vaginally, but that if they could have stayed in longer, they should have, so that they could develop more. So the attachment is formed between child and mother in the first year. And what that is teaching your child that you are there for them, and that turns off the survival brain so that they can feel at peace, they can feel relaxed, they can be in a place where they're not in fight or flight all the time, where they don't have all this cortisol flooding their brains all the time. And that puts them in a place where they can thrive. As babies, they can explore, they can develop their skills, they can reach their milestones, and they do all that because of the secure attachment they have with their primary caregiver. And that secure attachment is formed within the first year, but it's reinforced within the first 3 years. So that is why the first 3 years are very important. You know, again, I'm going to defer you to the other video I have on this topic, because otherwise this whole video I could talk about this. I'm just so fascinated by this topic because I really see the evidence behind it, and I see the repercussions of how this affects everybody. Like, I can look at any person I know now and I can see how, you know, I could almost infer based on the way they are, the kind of attachment that they had with their parents. And even, you know, if I watch how they parent their kids, the kind of attachment that they are developing and how it just affects you throughout your lifetime. So it's actually one of the greatest gifts you can give your kids as well, because if you give your child the gift of a secure attachment, which requires a conscious parent to do that, you are setting them up mentally for the rest of their lives. You're setting them up for successful emotional health, mental health. And in this day and age, we talk a lot about mental health, but it really does start at the beginning. It does start with the parents. And so that is our responsibility. So some of the best resources I can offer you on this subject, some of the best experts, Erica Kamazar, she would be the first one I would defer you to, because she's extremely eloquent, she's extremely knowledgeable, she is an expert on the subject, and she's written books and has done a lot of content on podcasts on YouTube, so you have a lot of content that's freely accessible to you. So her name's Erica Kamazar. Another one is Gabor Mate. I'm sure you're familiar with him. He's also extremely knowledgeable about this topic. Another one is Stan Tatkin, who's written some books, and Becky Kennedy. So these are all excellent resources for you. I would start with Erica Kamazar and just take the time to invest into learning about this topic, because it will pay dividends into not only your child's future, but your future. It will actually make parenting easier for you down the road when you have teenagers, and you'll understand why when you learn about this topic. The next thing is to prepare yourself mentally for your life to completely change. I think that, I don't know, I think there's definitely some lies about parenting that people just don't tell you about. They don't really tell you about the realities of parenting, the realities of motherhood. I think that a lot of moms feel a lot of guilt, so they don't want to share with you how challenging it can be sometimes. But you know what? Coming from my place, my point of view, it doesn't matter how many resources at your fingertips, parenting is going to be challenging. And your life will never be the same again. I had this idea that I would have a child and that I would just return to life as it was prior to having that baby. And that the only thing that would change is that I would have a baby. Like, I was just very naive to the reality of it. So I think just preparing yourself mentally that life as you know it will change. And in those initial months, those first few months, and maybe even the first years, it might sometimes feel like the challenges are overwhelming compared to the benefits of parenting, and sometimes you might wish that your life was the way it was before. But I think overall you have to look at the big picture, and I think you have to realize how the challenges that parenting brings also brings with it an opportunity for tremendous growth, tremendous personal growth. And if you're willing to see that opportunity, it can be the adventure of a lifetime. I see being a mother as an incredible spiritual journey for myself. It requires me to become incredibly empathetic, patient, forgiving, kind, resilient. I have developed in so many ways. I have grown in so many ways over the last 2 years that I would have never had reason to grow if I didn't have my child. And so, yes, it's been difficult in many ways, but it's also made me a better person. It's made me more of Tatiana, you know, it's allowed me to become a better person. And I see that as such a blessing. And I also see it as like, you can't just keep holding on to that past life that you had, because that was one season of your life. That was one chapter of your life, you know. You have your teenage years and we recognize that. That was a chapter in my life and I'm not a teenager anymore. And then you have your early 20s and you're like, that was a season in my life and I'm not in early 20s anymore. And you know, you recognize that there's that time to party and have fun, and then you enter adulthood and you're in this season of your life and building your career and professional and all of that. And then there's this season of motherhood. And you have to really recognize it as a season, but also just as a transformation of who you are. You know, you are no longer just the maiden, you are now the mother. And that is something that you will never get back. You will never be the maiden again. So letting go of her is really key, because I think that the holding on is what causes the suffering. And if you can just let go of the identity of being that maiden and see the transformation that has taken place into mother. And mother encompasses everything. It's maiden, it's mother, it's partner, it's so many different things. And see the opportunity ahead of you that you have to develop yourself and becoming this mother. What I'm trying to say is to just prepare yourself for life to change and to not hold on so much to the previous life that you lived, because it's through that holding on that the suffering can happen. Of course, it's not for everyone. Like, I'm not saying that this is going to be your situation, but for most people, there's a huge identity shift. And to allow that identity shift. And the key to not suffering is to not try and get it back, try and be that woman that you were before. It's like, no, you are someone different now, and you're so much more, and you have to decide who are you going to be. You have to write the new script, and that's where that transformation takes place. So people feel a loss of identity when they become a mother, but that's because they haven't written their new identity. You have to decide, what is your new identity? What do you want to become? Who do you want to become? Set goals for yourself and create a compelling vision for your future as this new identity. Okay, the next thing is to do your best to set yourself up to take as much time as you want away from work. This is tricky, but what I want to say to you is that you might think that you will want to go back to work in 6 months, and then when you hold your baby in your arms and you look into his or her eyes, you just melt and you say, there's no way I want to leave this baby at home. There's no way I want to leave this baby with someone else. And you might just say, I want to have another year off, or 2 years, or maybe you say I want to take off the first 3 years. And so that might not be realistic for everyone, I understand, especially those who are single parents. However, if you can prepare yourself for that possibility, do that. You know, if you are planning your pregnancy and trying to prepare in advance, if you're that type of person like myself, then set yourself up for success. Set yourself up so that you can be in a position where you don't feel like you have to work in order to survive, in order to keep a house over your head and food on the table. So that's going to require planning, and that's going to require the support of your spouse or your village if you have a village. And it's going to mean probably cutting back on things. So maybe you don't need 2 cars, maybe someone can take public transit. Maybe it is downsizing your house. You know, you have to figure out ways personally in your personal life. What are things right now that are luxuries in my life that are not necessities that I could cut back on in the event that I am no longer providing that second income to our family? So can my partner provide for us on just one income if we make these lifestyle adjustments? And I think for a lot of people that is possible. A lot of people, they do figure it out, because when the desire is strong enough, they will make it work. And so again, it will require maybe sacrifice in different areas of your life. And you have to admit that when you're single and it's just you and your partner, and you guys are just both working professionals and you have all this disposable income, you end up spending a lot of money on things that maybe are not the biggest priority, that are maybe luxuries. And then you get into the habit of that. And so now you have to really have a reality check and say, okay, what can we cut back on? How can we decrease our lifestyle expenses? Do we need to go out every Friday night? Do we need to, go out for drinks? Do I need to go on this hunting trip? Everything. Look at everything that you do in your life and figure out there's 2 categories. These are the necessities that we cannot touch. And then these things here are just some luxuries that we treat ourselves to. If we needed to cut some of these out, which ones would it be? So I think that's really important, because again, there's so many women who think that they want to, go back to work as soon as possible after they have a baby. But again, biologically, something shifts in your mind after you have that child, and you may want the option to stay home. And you may also feel like that is what is best for your family. Maybe you have a child that has special needs, and maybe it becomes a necessity for you to stay home. So to plan this in advance is very helpful. Okay, next thing is pregnancy supplements. What are the pregnancy supplements that you should be taking? So of course we all know to take a prenatal. Prenatals are very important because it has a bunch of vitamins stuffed into one, and that's really helpful, especially if you're not someone who regularly takes vitamins or someone who doesn't consider themselves very healthy. You have to realize that your body is literally creating a human being and requires a lot of nutrients to do that. And if you don't have enough stores of those nutrients in your body, I mean, you're going to be depleted yourself, because the body is going to find a way to get those nutrients, even if it's stripping it from your bones, from you, and you will become frail and you will have a lot of pregnancy sicknesses. You want to really have those stores filled before you get pregnant and during pregnancy, so that you can have a nice pregnancy and so that your baby can grow healthily in your womb. So getting a high quality prenatal. So prenatals can be expensive, the high quality ones, but you do the best that you can. The brand that I take is called Optimal Prenatals. They have something called a methylated version of folate, which is one of the nutrients that's very important to take during pregnancy. And the reason that I highlight this ingredient that they have is because a lot of prenatals just have folate, but 50%, I think, of women, they can't metabolize folate. They can't methylate folate. And so they're not actually able to gain the benefits of this nutrient. And so when you get a pre-methylated version of folate, then your body is sure to use it. And folate is essential for the development of your child. So make sure to look for prenatal that has a pre-methylated version of folate. The second thing is cod liver oil. Cod liver oil is very important because Every cell in your body is made up of fats. It's the building blocks of cells, and cod liver oil is one of the highest quality fats that you can consume. And so I would highly recommend taking cod liver oil as a liquid and just taking it as much as you can during pregnancy. Some people are worried about vitamin A with cod liver oil, but if you really dig into the research, when you're taking a whole food form of vitamin A, you don't have to worry about toxicity of overdosing on vitamin A, because the body basically just rids itself of the excess. It's only when you take a synthetic version of vitamin A that you have to worry about that. So cod liver oil, very essential. Next one is choline. Choline is essential for brain development of the baby and cognitive development. Choline is something that you can find in eggs, so if you're someone who consumes a lot of eggs, you might not need to take a choline supplement, but it's something that they don't know much about this supplement, choline, and it's yet so beneficial for the developing baby. Also, I give it to my son, my toddler, because it's so good for the brain development in those early years. And everyone, because they even give it to older adults with Alzheimer's, because it helps with brain function. So choline is another one. And then the last one is liver. So liver is something that not a lot of people are keen to consume because it's an acquired taste. So if you cannot consume actual liver, then take a supplement, because liver is it is actually the most nutrient dense food on the planet. Okay, it's so healthy for you. It is so jam-packed with every single nutrient and vitamin, and it is just like if there was ever a superfood, it's liver. And it's so underplayed. Most cultures, they eat the animal from nose to tail, and they understand the balance between high protein meats like muscle meats and organ meats. And so they consume enough organ meats to help balance the muscle meats. And our culture, we just throw out the organ meats because we think that that's gross. And we just eat all the muscle meats. But that creates an imbalance in our bodies. And so it's actually in the organ meats that we're getting the most nutrition. So taking a liver supplement is going to give you so much energy. It's going to give you everything you need. Just take it. Okay, so labor choices. This is obviously something that's very personal. And my labor is going to be different. My labor choices this time around is different than with my first pregnancy. So with my first pregnancy, I had intended to do a home water birth. I had this vision of giving birth at home in a beautiful environment with dim lighting, with music, with essential oils, with my affirmation cards on the walls. And I was able to labor most of the time at home in that environment, and it was beautiful and it was idealistic. And the idea was that I wanted my baby to be born in water, because that transition from the fluid in the womb to water is a beautiful transition for them. It's not as jarring as coming out in these bright lights in a hospital and being held by a doctor and then, rubbed with a towel. It's just that's very shocking. Birth for a child is already an experience, but you can help make that experience a lot more relaxing. And so that was the idea behind the home birth. Unfortunately, it didn't end that way. So with my pregnancy, the first time around, I was just not dilating. I was hours and hours and hours at home. I ended up involuntarily pushing for many hours, and I was pushing before I was 10 centimeters dilated. It caused a lot of swelling in my cervix. So I ended up in the hospital, which I knew was a possibility. And in the hospital, I ended up having a C-section because I was not able to birth vaginally after we attempted that. So this time around, I am going straight to the hospital, not because I don't want that home birth experience. To be honest, I would do that here if I could, but I'm in Panama now. The first time I gave birth in Canada, I'm in Panama now. I live 2 to 4 hours away from the hospital where we will be birthing. So it would be irresponsible of me to give birth here at home when I know that there's always a possibility that I require an emergency trip to the hospital. That's just the reality. And I am not naive to that. So while I would have loved to give my baby that opportunity to be birthed at home in the water in a beautiful environment, and then I could just, give birth and go in my bed and be in my comfortable home, it's just not, I don't feel comfortable with that here given the circumstances. So I'm doing a hospital birth, and I'm not, I'm a little bit more particular about how I want things done in the hospital, because there's things that I agree with and things that I don't. And that's just, again, personal opinion. You do you. I think, again, every mother should do her own research and do what she feels most comfortable with. So I'm going for a VBAC, a vaginal delivery after cesarean. I'm hoping that I can birth vaginally this time. I'm going to be doing that without Pitocin. So I don't want to use Pitocin during this labor, because after you have a C-section, you have a scar on your cervix, on your uterus, and if you get pregnant relatively quickly after having your first child, with less than 18 months apart from your first child, then you increase the risk of something called cervical rupture, where that scar can open up and it can rupture, and then it becomes life-threatening for the baby and maybe for yourself. So to reduce the possibility of that happening, one thing that you want to avoid is Pitocin, because Pitocin will make contractions very strong. And so I am choosing not to use Pitocin during this labor, and therefore I also want to avoid the epidural if I can. I'm not opposed to the epidural. If I absolutely need it, I will. But usually when you get an epidural, sometimes that's followed up by Pitocin, because what ends up happening is you become so numb that you can have a harder time to push and dilate, so they usually end up combining the two. So I'm going to try and avoid that if I can, and I'm going to try and just allow my body to relax as much as possible and allow myself that vaginal birth. Now, if it doesn't happen vaginally, I don't want to use forceps, I don't want to use a vacuum, I would rather go straight to a C-section. I've made that decision because I've seen and read about the damages that those things can cause to the baby and also to me, and I don't want those potential injuries to the child. Now, if I were to end up in a C-section, then one of my preferences is for them to do a vaginal swab. Vaginal birth and a C-section birth are not equal, and there's no argument here. We all know this. Of course, you deliver in whatever way is safest for you and the baby, because the ultimate goal is to get your baby in your arms healthy. But if you have a choice, I would never do an elective C-section, because you are, first of all, it's a surgery that cuts through 8 layers of your tissue, and it's a big recovery for mom. So it's not something easy. But secondly, you're not setting your baby up for success with their gut microbiome. So the baby's gut microbiome, they breathe their first breath of bacteria going through the vaginal canal, and that helps them to develop the flora in their gut microbiome, which helps them to build their immune system. And it's very important. So they've done a lot of studies on this, and they've shown how babies delivered vaginally have better immune systems than babies born by a C-section, because they don't get that benefit of going through the vaginal canal. Another reason is because when you go through the vagina, the baby's head cones, and there's these bones in the head that they're made to cone, and then later they relax. And when you go through the belly and you don't go through that process of coning and then relaxing, that can cause a lot of tension here, and that can cause a lot of problems for the baby down the road. Someone who talks about this is Gary from the Human Garage, so you can look him up on Instagram. He's the one who talked about this with me and expressed it to me. He did like a opening of Lucas's head when we visited him so that he could have that space created in his temples. So, there's benefits of, the way God created it is usually the best. And so if we can go with that route, then that's great. If there's obviously a life-saving reason to go with an alternative route like a C-section, then we'll go that way. Of course, we're not going to be opposed to it. So for me though, if I'm doing the C-section, I want them to do a vaginal swab. This is something a lot of people don't talk about, but basically what it is like a swab of your vagina, bacteria, and what you do is then you put it on the baby's face once they're born, and it's trying to mimic the experience of going through the vaginal canal. And then also, once the baby's born, I don't want them to wipe off the vernix. The vernix is that white coating on the baby's skin. That's like the golden baby lotion of baby lotions. You know, like that stuff is so valuable for the baby. It also keeps the baby warm, helps to moderate their temperature. So keep that on and actually rub it in the skin is better for the baby. And then I don't want them to give the baby a bath. That's something I'm gonna do when I feel comfortable with it, and that might be weeks later. Newborn babies really don't need baths. Again, you don't, like, they're coming out of your womb fresh. You know, you wanna not mess around too much with the skin and the oils and all of that. It's all new, and you want to give them time to develop naturally. What else do I want? Skin to skin. Skin to skin is a big thing. So whether I'm vaginal, I want that baby on my chest right away. If it's C-section, I want that baby on my husband's chest right away. We were able to do that with Lucas. I did a C-section and he immediately went to my husband. My husband took off his shirt in the hospital room while I was getting stitched up, and he put that baby on his chest right away. And I think that's really important. The skin to skin helps to regulate baby's heart and body temperature. And there's a lot of, chemical benefits to it as well for both mom, dad, and baby. Another thing I want to do is delayed cord clamping. So this is something that a lot of people are aware of now. Most hospitals actually recognize this. So in the past, they would cut the cord basically right away. Now they wait 30, 60 seconds before they cut the cord, but I would request that they wait until the cord stops pulsating. So when the baby first comes out, the cord is purple, bluish color, and that's because it's full of blood. So all of that blood is the baby's blood that's transferring from the placenta into the baby, and that baby deserves that blood, it needs that blood, and it also is full of stem cells. And when you cut that off right away, you're denying the baby of the blood that it was supposed to receive. So the idea is to allow that cord time to transfer all of that to the baby. And it differs. Some babies, it is only 30 seconds. Some babies, it's 3 minutes. Some babies, it's 5 minutes. So asking for them to wait to cut the cord, as long as it's safe and not medically necessary to cut the cord, is the best thing. And you know that it's done transferring because then the cord turns gray or white, and it's a completely different color. And you're like, okay, we're good, we're done. So that's another preference. And the last preference I have is, well, in Canada, and I'm not sure here if they do it, but in Canada they don't do the eye drops, so that's something that I didn't have to worry about with my first birth. But if I were in the US, I would request not to do that because it doesn't really make sense to do that unless you suspect that you have gonorrhea. It's not really necessary, and they are antibiotics. Like, you want to avoid giving a newborn antibiotics if at all possible, because again, you want to be building that gut microbiome, not wiping it out. And then also they give a Hep B vaccine. That's something that I'm not interested in. Again, that's totally unnecessary. If you actually research the reasons why someone would need to get a Hep B, it makes no sense. And if you ask any provider, if you ask a doctor or nurse and you ask them, they will straight up tell you, like, yeah, I mean, maybe if someone has a needle that gets in contact with your child, or maybe a family member has it, and it's just like the possibility of your child contracting a sexual disease, which is what it is. A sexual disease is so low that you really have to ponder, why are they giving the Hep B vaccine to every single baby, even after they test the mother and she shows negative. So that's kind of a deep dive that I went into, and I just learned it's just completely unnecessary. So unless you're like someone who's in a really bad home environment, dirty, the baby's going to be around a lot of, people that you're not sure about, maybe those circumstances. But for the vast majority of anyone watching this, do your research on that one. And then the last one is the vitamin K vaccine, which is actually it's not just a vitamin. That's something that you would give to your baby because they worry about internal bleeding. The reason that they worry about that is because babies are born with low vitamin K, but babies naturally start to build their vitamin K around day 8 of being born. The idea around babies being born with low vitamin K is that if the blood is really thick, then, for example, these stem cells that are supposed to be dispersed throughout the body, they don't get to go to the places that they're supposed to go. And so God made it so that babies are going to be lower in vitamin K so that the blood is a little bit thinner and that everything goes where it needs to go. And then by day 8, they start to, their blood starts to thicken. And that is why in Jewish tradition, they don't circumcise the child until the 8th day when they have naturally built up more of the vitamin K. So they have this knowledge. But the argument to, the vitamin K is that yes, maybe we shouldn't mess with what God created. We're kind of saying that God created all babies deficient, but the argument is that we live in a culture now where we're so nutrient deficient ourselves as mothers that the levels of vitamin K that the baby should have, they don't have because we're so depleted in our own vitamin K stores. And so that's why we should give it to the babies, because in the event that they do have this internal bleeding, it is life-threatening. It is serious. It's a low chance, but if it happens, it's undetectable most cases and they can die. So because the risk is so great, even though the chances are small of it happening, we should give it to everybody. Especially since most people do, well, I shouldn't say most people, it's definitely changed, but a lot of people do decide to circumcise. And so anytime there's trauma, that increases the risk of internal bleeding and hemorrhaging and would cause reason to want to have the vitamin K. So my understanding originally was that, well, I don't need the vitamin K unless I have a traumatic birth. So unless some sort of trauma occurred during birth, whether it was a traumatic birth experience itself, the baby came out with bruises, especially on the head, if they used a vacuum or forceps, if it was a really long labor, then those might be reasons to give the vitamin K. Or if I were to decide to circumcise, that might be another reason. But what I did learn is that babies can go through a very easy and simple and natural and fast birth without any complications, and they could still have a chance of developing this internal bleeding. So for that reason, I decided that I do want to give the vitamin K, but I'm not going to give it as a vaccine. I'm going to give it as the oral drops. And the studies show that the oral drops are just as effective as the vaccine if you give them according to the schedule. And so if you don't give it according to the schedule, then of course they won't be as effective. But if you do honor the schedule, then they are just as effective. Now, the reason I would give the oral drops instead of the vaccine is because the oral drops are without additives. And the vaccine is not just the vitamin. It's not just the vitamin K. It also has aluminum, and it has another ingredient that is not very good, that we know is not very good. So I'm not comfortable with that for various reasons. And so if there's an alternative, which there is, the drops, that doesn't have those additives and offers the same benefit, then that's what I'm going to give him. So I did that with Lucas, and I'm going to do that this time around with the new baby. Okay, so I think those are all of my labor and birth choices, and the rest is up to God, and gotta trust the process and let go and not be so attached to how you want things to go, because at the end of the day, you cannot predict how your labor is gonna go, and just the outcome is a healthy baby and a healthy mama. We're gonna break this up into 2 videos because otherwise this video is gonna be really long. So I'm going to end here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm going to share with you part 2 of this video in the description box below. All right, guys, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.